Welcome to Behind the Mask, the place where we dig into the cases that leave you stunned and make you ask the hard questions. If it's your first time here, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We drop long-form breakdowns, evidence timelines, and the kind of context the headlines never show. Today's episode is one of those stories that's difficult to read and impossible to ignore. It's about trust, betrayal, and the fallout that tears families apart. Let's get into it. How a family secret came out. This case starts like a domestic scene you've probably seen 100 times on TV. A quiet house, video games, a movie playing in the background. But what happened in that living room in Marion County, Florida, last summer ripped a family in two and put a 35-year-old nurse on a path to prison. The person who should have been protecting children instead became the accused. The person who found out, her husband, walked in, saw what was happening, and everything unraveled. The victim was 15. It's the sort of detail that makes your skin tighten. The discovery was accidental, the reaction complicated, and the next steps messy. Instead of an immediate call to police, the father, stunned and likely panicked, told his son to pack his things and go stay with grandparents. It wasn't until the teen returned home to his mother in Washington, D.C., and told her what had happened, that a formal investigation began. That call set off a chain that ended with an arrest in November 2024 and the suspension of a nursing license. When cases like this hit the public, the headlines tend to flatten the human part of the story. We read the short version: nurse arrested, plea deal, sentenced to 2 years, and move on. But the full picture includes trauma, family pressure, legal calculus, and the sometimes agonizing choices victims and their families make. This episode will walk that full arc. Who Alexis Von Yates was in the community, the lead-up to the incident, the investigation, the plea deal, and the aftermath. Along the way, I'll explain the legal mechanics and the real costs these events have on people living through them. Before we go deeper, a quick heads up. I'm going to talk about disturbing behavior and the legal fallout. I'm keeping the descriptions factual and non-graphic. If you need a break at any point, that's okay. Resources will be in the description. Also, stick around through the middle of the video. I've got context and legal insight that explains why the case resolved the way it did, and why the family made the choices they did. Who was Alexis Von Yates? Alexis Von Yates, mid-30s, a nurse by trade in Marion County, Florida, was someone the community might have assumed was a caregiver first and foremost. In small towns and suburbs, nurses are trusted figures. That's the first layer of betrayal if the allegations are true. A person in a caring profession accused of harming a child. That contrast, caregiver versus alleged predator, is what makes headlines linger. Public records and local reporting show this incident occurred while the teen was visiting his father's home during summer 2024. According to the documents later filed with the court, what started as seemingly normal evenings, playing video games and watching movies, contained a pattern of boundary-pushing behavior that escalated over time. The boy later told investigators the behavior included sexualized talk and other signs that prosecutors described as grooming. Those statements formed the backbone of the arrest affidavit. Why does grooming matter? Because it reframes the story from a sudden misstep to a pattern that prepared the child for a boundary violation. Grooming typically involves normalization, jokes or comments that sexualize the relationship, small violations that test a child's response, and actions that create an unequal emotional dependency. In the files in this case, investigators recorded examples of that pattern, enough to convince the state to pursue serious charges. That pattern also helps explain why some family members initially reacted by trying to contain the situation rather than report it. The dynamics in families that experience abuse are complicated. Shame, denial, fear of scandal, and misguided loyalty can all play roles. To be clear on the public facts, the teen was 15 at the time of the alleged acts. An anonymous tip and the later report from the teen's mother led to police involvement, and Von Yates was arrested on November 6, 2024, on charges that would later be adjusted as the case progressed. After the arrest, the Florida Department of Health moved to suspend her nursing license citing public safety concerns. Those administrative and criminal actions would run on parallel tracks. If you're wondering how a case like this becomes public, it's not only the police report. Once an arrest occurs and charges are filed, local outlets begin to pick up the story, social media often accelerates the spread. That visibility can influence how family members behave, how comfortable a victim feels about testifying, and, crucially, how a prosecutor weighs the decision to seek a trial versus accept a plea. We'll explore that legal calculus later, but for now understand this: the professional identity of the accused amplified the public interest, and the emotional harm to the family. The night reconstructed. What investigators say, let's reconstruct the night in a way that's careful with facts. According to the arrest affidavit and the forensic interview summary that prosecutors cited, the teen spent an evening at his father's house. The younger half-siblings went to bed. The teen and Vaughn Yates stayed up, reportedly playing video games and watching a movie. The teen later told investigators that in the days before the incident, Vaughn Yates had made sexual comments in his presence, and that the evening's behavior escalated. The report describes the progression in a way that investigators felt indicated deliberate boundary crossing rather than a single impulsive ACT.at. One point that evening, sexual contact occurred between Vaughn Yates and the teen. The father allegedly walked in on them. The immediate response, telling the child to leave to grandparents rather than calling police, is a decision that often surfaces in the aftermath of family trauma. Shock, an attempt to calm the situation, or a misguided effort to keep things private. Whatever the motive, this choice delayed formal reporting and complicated the timeline investigators would later assemble. When the teen returned home to his mother in Washington, D.C., he disclosed what had happened. That disclosure triggered the forensic interview and the subsequent arrest on November 6, 2024. The forensic interview process is designed to be trauma-informed and to reduce the likelihood of leading questions, creating a record that prosecutors can rely on. In this case, the interview and the corroborating details, the father's discovery and statements reflected in the affidavit, were enough to support charges. One thing that emerges in reading the filings: the accused allegedly made statements afterward, in some accounts, attempting to shift blame or to minimize what occurred. Multiple family members allegedly discouraged the teen from reporting. That pattern, delay, discouragement, competing narratives, is not unusual in family abuse cases. It's critical for viewers to understand how that family pressure can affect the decision to pursue charges, the victim's willingness to testify, and the prosecutor's choices about what to charge and how to proceed. The investigation, arrest, and administrative action. Once the mother told authorities, law enforcement opened an investigation. Forensic interviews were conducted, evidence was collected, and the prosecutor's office reviewed the arrest affidavit and supporting materials. Investigators arrested Alexis Vaughn Yates on November 6, 2024. Initially, prosecutors considered a first-degree felony charge, sexual battery by a person in a position of familial authority, a crime that, in Florida, carries very severe penalties. That initial charging decision reflected the gravity of the allegations and the presence of corroborating details in the affidavit in parallel with the criminal process. The Florida Department of Health and the state's licensing authorities opened administrative proceedings. On April 25, 2025, state health officials issued an emergency suspension order for Vaughn Yates's nursing license, citing immediate danger to public safety if she were allowed to continue practicing. Health boards often take swift administrative action in cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct, especially when the accused works in a caring profession and the allegation involves a minor. Those administrative actions are distinct from criminal guilt or innocence, but they can end careers quickly, and, in this case, the emergency suspension signaled serious professional consequences even before a final criminal outcome. It's worth pausing on 2 points. First, the presence of an emergency license suspension is procedural but telling. Licensing boards weigh public safety and the reputational risk to the profession heavily. Second, this case would be subject to a painful tension that prosecutors face regularly. The strongest criminal charge might mean a tougher sentence if convicted, but it could also make it more likely the victim would have to testify publicly, a process that can be traumatizing. That legal trade-off became central to how the case was resolved, as we'll see in later chapters. If this is not the sort of case you can ignore, hit the like button. It helps others find this breakdown. And if you want the legal deep dive that explains why prosecutors sometimes accept plea deals instead of taking cases to trial, stick around. Coming up next, I'll walk you through the charges, the plea, and what the sentence actually means. Great, let's continue. The legal calculus. charges, and the plea deal. When Alexis Vaughn Yates was arrested on November 6, 2024, she faced the possibility of a first-degree felony. In Florida, that kind of charge, sexual battery by a person in a position of familial authority, can carry a life sentence. Prosecutors had the affidavit, they had a forensic interview, and they had at least partial corroboration from the father who walked in on the act. On paper, it looked like a strong case. So why didn't the case go to trial? Why did it end with a plea deal, a downgraded charge, and a 2-year sentence? The answer lies in the balance prosecutors have to strike. On one hand, you want justice and accountability. On the other, you have to protect the victim from unnecessary trauma. Trials involving minors, especially in sexual abuse cases, are brutal. Defense attorneys have the right to cross-examine, to push on credibility, to bring up inconsistencies. Even with rules designed to protect children, the courtroom can become a place of re-traumatization. The prosecutor in this case openly stated that sparing the teen from reliving the experience in a public trial was one of the driving factors in offering the plea. So, the charge was reduced to lewd and lascivious battery, a second-degree felony. The deal included 2 years in state prison, 10 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory sex offender registration for life. It's a package that removes Yates from society, but not forever. It marks her permanently, but it avoids the emotional carnage of a trial. For the boy and his family, that was a compromise. Shorter prison time in exchange for avoiding a spectacle. For the community, it raised eyebrows. Why only 2 years? Why not more? These are the tensions you see in courtroom corridors all the time. Punishment versus protection. Principle versus practicality. The courtroom. Sentencing day. By September 2025, Alexis Vaughn Yates stood before a judge to receive her sentence. 2 years in prison. 10 years probation. Sex offender registration. The words were clinical, but the atmosphere in court was anything but. The boy's mother spoke directly to Yates, calling her a coward and an incestuous predator. Her statement wasn't just about punishment, it was about recognition. She wanted the court, the public, and Yates herself to acknowledge the harm done. That's often what victim impact statements are. Not a chance to change the sentence, but a chance to reclaim narrative power. The judge explained the reasoning behind the deal. Protecting the child from further trauma, ensuring accountability through lifelong restrictions, and weighing the realities of conviction odds. Was it enough? That's for society to debate. But the ruling was final. For Yates, that moment sealed her fate. For the boy, it meant no cross-examination, no hostile courtroom replaying his trauma. For the father, it meant the case that had started with his discovery of the act was now a public record. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. I cover these cases in detail so you not only hear what happened, but why the courts made the decisions they did. And trust me, the fallout from this case is just as devastating as the sentence. Family fallout. A broken home. When you read court records, the language is dry. Affidavits, filings, motions. But behind every page is a family trying to figure out how to live with what just happened. In this case, the fallout was catastrophic. The boy's relationship with his father shattered. According to multiple reports, they have not spoken since the incident. Imagine being a teenager trying to process trauma and feeling that the parent who should have protected you didn't do enough. The father may have been shocked, confused, trying to keep the peace in the moment. But to the boy, that looked like abandonment. That's a wound that may never heal. The mother, living in D.C., stepped into the role of protector and advocate. She became the one who pushed for charges, for accountability, and for a sentence that acknowledged the damage. Her statement in court was raw, cutting, and deeply personal. And then there were extended relatives. Some tried to minimize, some allegedly claimed the teen had manipulated the adult. That's an old and harmful trope, blaming victims for adult crimes. In reality, minors cannot consent to adults. The power imbalance makes it impossible. Those comments reveal the denial and deflection that often surround cases like this. For the boy, those voices can sting just as much as the crime itself. Abuse survivors often say that what hurts the most is not just the act, but the disbelief or betrayal that follows. That's why advocacy groups stress the importance of believing victims, because doubt can deepen trauma. Life after sentencing, consequences beyond prison. 2 years in prison may sound like a blip compared to other crimes. But here's the thing. The punishment doesn't stop when Alexis Von Yates leaves prison walls. She will serve 10 years of probation under strict supervision. Every move, every job application, every address will have to be reported. She will be listed permanently on the sex offender registry, a label that never goes away. Finding housing, employment, and community acceptance will be almost impossible. She will be monitored, restricted, and stigmatized for life. And her nursing license? Suspended, likely gone forever. Healthcare licensing boards treat sexual offenses with zero tolerance. Even if she wanted to return, the suspension order already frames her as a danger to the public. In effect, her career in medicine is finished. This is why prosecutors sometimes argue that even short prison terms can still be significant. The social, professional, and personal fallout extends far beyond the official sentence. 2 years may sound short, but the consequences stretch decades. Outro CTA Natural Close. This case is a brutal reminder that predators don't always come from outside the home. Sometimes the danger is sitting right across the dinner table. What do you think? Was the plea deal fair? Or should the case have gone to trial no matter the cost? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe. We've got more cases coming that will shock you. Female perpetrators. Why society struggles to see them. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case isn't just what happened. It's how people reacted. When a man is accused of abusing a child, outrage is almost universal. But when the perpetrator is a woman, especially one in a position like a nurse, reactions shift. You'll hear phrases like, well, maybe the boy wanted it, or, it's not the same as if it were a girl. This double standard runs deep. Society often frames women as caregivers, protectors, nurturers. So when the predator is female, people struggle to reconcile the act with the stereotype. Instead of condemnation, you sometimes get minimization. Victims, especially boys, are told they're lucky, or that it was just a mistake. But here's the truth. Abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter the gender of the predator. Power dynamics, coercion, and betrayal of trust are the core. In Alexis's case, she wasn't just a random woman. She was a stepmother, a nurse, a caregiver. Those roles magnify the betrayal. Experts in psychology have long pointed out that male victims of female predators often suffer in silence because of stigma. They're less likely to be believed, less likely to receive support, and more likely to carry shame into adulthood. And that makes cases like this even more dangerous, because silence is the predator's greatest shield. The psychology of grooming and betrayal. How does something like this even happen? How does a family setting turn into a crime scene? The answer is grooming. Grooming isn't always about secret messages or elaborate plots. Sometimes it's about slow, subtle shifts in boundaries. A touch that lingers a little too long. A comment that crosses a line. An adult testing how far they can go without resistance. By the time the child realizes what's happening, the lines between normal and wrong have been blurred. In Alexis's case, investigators believe the grooming may have started weeks, if not months, before the act her husband witnessed. Court documents reference the teen's claims of other encounters. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern. And when the betrayal comes from a parent figure, the damage doubles. A child's world is built on trust. Trust that the adults in their life are there to protect them. When that trust is weaponized, it shatters the foundation of safety itself. Survivors often describe it as not just abuse of the body, but abuse of the soul. This case forces us to ask hard questions about justice. Was 2 years enough? Should prosecutors have pushed for a trial, even if it risked re-traumatizing the teen? Or was the plea deal the best possible outcome under terrible circumstances? Here's the reality. Plea deals are the backbone of the American justice system. Over 90% of criminal cases end in pleas, not trials. They save time, reduce costs, and protect victims. But they also spark debates about fairness. Did the offender get off easy? Or did the victim avoid further suffering? In Alexis's case, the compromise leaned toward protecting the teen. But that means the public is left with a sentence that feels shockingly light compared to the crime. And maybe that tension is the point. Justice isn't about perfect satisfaction. It's about managing imperfect options in a flawed system. At the end of the day, the case of Alexis Von Yates is about more than just one woman's crime. It's about trust broken, systems tested, and a family left scarred. It's easy to read about 2 years in prison and think justice failed. But when you look closer, you see the layers. A boy spared from a hostile courtroom, a predator permanently marked by the registry, and a family forced to pick up pieces that may never fit together again. And maybe that's the real horror here. Not just the act itself, but the ripple effect. The father estranged from his son, the mother fighting to be heard, the boy carrying scars that no sentence can erase. What do you think? Was the plea deal a reasonable compromise to protect the teen, or should this case have gone all the way to trial? Do you believe justice was served, or did the system fail? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into real-life true crime cases, because these stories deserve to be told and remembered.